A rebellious millionaire weds a beggar girl to defy his father, expecting humiliation to follow. But little does he know, this mysterious bride holds secrets that will turn his entire world upside down. The night stretched luxuriously over the city, the glow of chandeliers casting soft light through the grand Robinson mansion's tall windows. Inside, Lucas Robinson lounged on an opulent leather couch, a crystal tumbler of whiskey in one hand and his phone in the other. His friends, equally well-dressed and exuding an air of privilege, laughed boisterously as music thumped in the background. The air smelled of extravagance, a blend of imported cigars, aged scotch, and perfume so costly it whispered wealth. "Lucas, you're impossible," one of his friends slurred, holding up an empty glass for a refill. "Did you really buy that sports car just to ditch it after one race?" Lucas chuckled, his grin lazy and self-assured. "Why not? Life's about moments, isn't it? Why let a car stick around when the thrill is gone?" His voice, smooth and indifferent, carried a confidence that bordered on arrogance. Victoria, his stepmother, entered the room briefly, her sharp eyes scanning the gathering. Her high heels clicked softly on the marble floor as she approached Lucas. "Don't stay up too late, darling," she purred, resting a hand on his shoulder. "You've had a long day. Or rather, a long night," she added with a knowing smile, before glancing at the half-empty bottle on the table. She never scolded him. Victoria's indulgence was calculated, almost strategic. Kevin Robinson, however, wasn't one to turn a blind eye. Standing at the top of the sweeping staircase, he observed the scene below with a clenched jaw and weary eyes. He wasn't a man easily shaken, but watching his only son squander what could have been a legacy of ambition and achievement twisted something deep inside him. The next morning, Lucas awoke to sunlight streaming through the silk curtains of his oversized bedroom. The faint remnants of last night's revelry clung to his senses, a dull headache and the faint scent of whiskey on his breath. He stretched languidly and checked his phone, his inbox filled with invitations to galas and yacht parties. But the morning brought more than a hangover. It brought Kevin Robinson, striding into Lucas's room without knocking. His tailored suit and polished shoes reflected his rigid demeanor, and the disapproval in his gaze was palpable. "Lucas," Kevin began, his voice steady but cold, "we need to talk." Lucas groaned, sitting up. "Can it wait, Dad? I've got plans later." "No," Kevin said firmly, crossing the room to stand by the window. He looked out at the manicured gardens, as if seeking strength from the serene view. "You've had plans every day, Lucas, and none of them involve anything meaningful." He turned back, his tone softening, though his disappointment was clear. "I'm not going to stand by and watch you waste your life anymore." Lucas smirked, feigning indifference. "Waste? I'm just enjoying it. Isn't that what money's for?" "Money," Kevin shot back, his voice rising slightly, "is for building something lasting, something that matters, not for endless parties and cars you barely drive. You're my son, Lucas. You're meant for more than this." Lucas's smirk faded. For a moment his father's words touched a nerve, but he quickly masked it with defiance. "So what's the plan, Dad? Another lecture? A cut in my allowance?" Kevin's jaw tightened. "No. You're going to marry, and you're going to have a child. After that, you can live however you please. But this family's legacy will not die with you." The room fell silent. Lucas stared at his father, disbelief turning to anger. "Marry?" he scoffed, rising from the bed. "You can't be serious." "I am," Kevin said, his gaze unwavering. "And if you refuse, don't expect a penny more from me." Lucas's laughter was bitter. "Fine," he said, grabbing a jacket. "If it's a wife you want, I'll find one. I'll marry the first woman I see on the street. Heck, I'll marry a beggar. How's that for a legacy?" Kevin's face darkened, and he staggered slightly, clutching his chest. The moment passed quickly, but the message was clear. His son's words had cut deeper than intended. "Be careful with your choices, Lucas," Kevin said, his voice low and strained. "You might find they have consequences you're not prepared for." Lucas left the house that day, his step quickly with rebellion, unaware that his decision would set off a chain of events destined to change them all. Lucas tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched in frustration. The echoes of his father's stern words still rang in his ears, each one like a sharp jab to his pride. The old man didn't understand. He never did. Lucas had grown up under the weight of expectations that felt more like chains, binding him to a life he didn't choose. As his sleek black sports car sped through the bustling streets of the city, Lucas knew one thing for certain. He would find a way to make his father regret every word he said. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the crowded sidewalks. Lucas barely noticed the people rushing about their day, their faces a blur of mundane worries and routines. He wasn't like them. At least, that's what he told himself. They didn't know what it was like to be him, to have everything, and yet feel so empty. Stop at a club he frequents. His gaze drifted to the sidewalk where a young woman sat cross-legged against a brick wall, her head slightly bowed. She clutched a cardboard sign that read, "Hungry. Anything helps." Her clothes were tattered, her hair pulled into a messy ponytail. Yet there was something about her that caught his attention. He approached the woman. She looked up as he approached, her eyes starting to turn blue, her beautiful face contrasting with her dirty appearance. "Spare some change?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Lucas frowned, unsure what had compelled him to stop. "What would you do with it?" he asked, more to fill the silence than out of genuine interest. The woman's lips curled into a faint smile. "Eat, maybe," she said dryly. "Or I could treat myself to a yacht. Depends on how generous you're feeling." Her wit caught him off guard. Lucas chuckled despite himself. "A yacht, huh? That's ambitious." She shrugged. "A girl can dream, or looking for a man who can make her dream come true." Lucas stuffed his hands into his pockets, his mind racing. Here was an opportunity, a way to push back against his father's ultimatum. "What if I offered you something better than loose change?" he asked, leaning slightly closer. Her brow furrowed, suspicion flashing in her eyes. "Like what?" "I'll buy you dinner," he said, "and in return, you come with me." "To where?" Her voice was cautious now, guarded. "My place. It's nothing weird," he added quickly, sensing her hesitation. "Think of it as a business deal. You play along, pretend to be my girlfriend for the evening. In return, I'll make sure you're taken care of." She tilted her head, studying him carefully. "And why would you want me to do that?" Lucas smirked. "Let's just say I'm in the mood to annoy someone." The woman hesitated, her fingers tightening around the edge of her sign. "You're serious?" "Completely." She exhaled slowly, considering his offer. The idea of walking into a stranger's life, even temporarily, was unsettling. But then again, the growl in her stomach reminded her she didn't have many options. "All right," she said finally, "but I want more than just dinner. I need enough cash to get through the next week." Lucas nodded. "Deal." The car ride was silent, save for the hum of the engine. Ashley, she'd introduced herself reluctantly, sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Lucas stole a glance at her now and then, amused by how out of place she looked in his luxury car. Yet she didn't seem intimidated, her expression calm and composed. When they arrived at the gates of the sprawling estate, Ashley's lips parted slightly, but she quickly masked her reaction. Lucas noted this with a flicker of curiosity. Most people would gape, or at least utter a comment. She didn't. Inside the mansion, the stark contrast between her worn sneakers and the gleaming marble floors was almost comical. Lucas expected her to hesitate, to shrink under the weight of her surroundings. Instead, she walked with a quiet confidence, her chin held high. "This is where you live?" she asked, her tone neutral. "Home sweet home," Lucas replied, his voice tinged with sarcasm. Ashley glanced around, her gaze lingering on the crystal chandelier above. "Not bad," she said simply. Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Not bad? That's it?" She met his gaze, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. "I've seen worse." For a moment, Lucas was taken aback. He'd brought her here to rattle his father, to make a point. But now, as he watched her stand unflinching in the face of such opulence, he found himself intrigued. This was going to be more interesting than he'd thought. The grand dining hall was eerily quiet as Lucas stood at the head of the table, his defiant declaration still lingering in the air. Robinson, his father, sat in his usual place, the heavy oak chair lending him a commanding presence even as the lines of age deepened on his face. His hands rested on the polished surface of the table, knuckles tense. For a moment, no one spoke. The clink of Victoria's diamond bracelet as she adjusted her wineglass was the only sound that broke the silence. Robinson's gaze shifted from his son to Ashley, who stood awkwardly near the doorway, her shoulders hunched as if trying to disappear. The young woman, draped in a plain sweater too large for her small frame, looked entirely out of place amidst the crystal chandeliers and opulent decor. Her eyes darted nervously between Lucas and the man who now studied her with quiet intensity. Finally, Robinson broke the silence. "So," he said, his voice steady but cold, "this is the woman you've chosen?" Lucas straightened, his arms crossed, the faintest smirk playing on his lips. "That's right. Ashley," he gestured toward her with a slight nod, "will be my wife." His tone was sharp, almost mocking, as if daring his father to protest. But Robinson didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Fine," he said after a long pause, his tone calm but laced with finality. "Marry her." Lucas blinked, the smirk slipping from his face. "What?" Robinson's gaze didn't waver. "If you want to go through with this, Lucas, you'll marry her. A real marriage. None of this posturing to prove a point. But if you won't, if you walk away now, you'll leave this house with nothing. Not a cent to your name." Victoria gasped audibly, her perfectly manicured hand flying to her chest. "Robinson, this is absurd. You can't seriously mean to—" "I mean every word," Robinson cut her off sharply, his voice rising for the first time. He turned back to Lucas, his blue eyes steely. "You think you can throw our name around like a toy in your childish games? Prove me wrong, Lucas. Marry her, build a life with her, or walk out of here and start over without my money." The room seemed to hold its breath. Victoria's reaction was immediate. "This is a disgrace," she exclaimed, standing abruptly. "For you to force my stepson, our family, into this humiliation. Do you know what people will say?" Her voice quivered with barely concealed fury. Robinson's hand came down on the table with a resounding thud, silencing her. "Victoria," he said firmly, his voice low and controlled, "this isn't your decision to make." Lucas stared at his father, stunned. He had expected outrage, shouting anything but this calm, calculated ultimatum. For a fleeting moment, doubt crept into his mind. But then he squared his shoulders, pushing the discomfort aside. "Fine," Lucas said, his voice laced with defiance. "If that's how you want to play it, Then so be it. I'll marry her. Ashley shifted uncomfortably, her wide eyes locked on the floor. She'd agreed to Lucas's plan because she had no better options, but now the weight of his words settled heavily on her. This wasn't just a ploy anymore. It was becoming something far more real and dangerous. "I'll marry her," Lucas repeated, louder this time, as if trying to convince himself as much as everyone else. Victoria's lips curled into a tight, disapproving smile. She slowly resumed her seat, her composure restored. "Well," she said, her tone saccharine, "if that's what the family has decided, then I'll do whatever I can to support this." "Arrangement." Lucas's gaze snapped to her, suspicious of her sudden shift. "That's uncharacteristically generous of you, Victoria," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. She tilted her head, her eyes gleaming. "I only want what's best for this family, Lucas, and if this is your choice, I'll stand by it." Behind her composed exterior, Victoria's mind was racing. She saw an opportunity in this chaos. If Lucas married Ashley, the young woman would serve as a perfect pawn. Victoria could manipulate her way to diminishing Robinson's influence and finally secure her place as the head of the family. Ashley, meanwhile, remained silent, her heart pounding in her chest. She had come into this arrangement expecting nothing more than temporary shelter and perhaps a chance to rebuild her shattered life. But now, standing in this gilded room, surrounded by people who viewed her as either a tool or an obstacle, she felt the sharp sting of isolation. The conversation shifted, but Ashley remained rooted in place, observing. Lucas, she noted, carried himself with the arrogance of someone accustomed to winning every argument, even when he wasn't entirely sure of his position. Robinson, though stern, exuded a quiet resolve that hinted at a deeper plan, and Victoria. Ashley couldn't shake the feeling that the older woman's sudden acceptance wasn't as innocent as it appeared. As the evening wore on, Lucas retreated to his wing of the house, leaving Ashley to find her way alone. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to breathe, but the quiet didn't bring comfort. It brought questions. What had she just agreed to, and what role would she play in this family's dangerous games? The mansion buzzed with preparations as the wedding date loomed closer, an event orchestrated with such speed it left no room for objections. Lucas stood at the edge of the grand dining hall, his jaw tight and his fists clenched in frustration. Servants scurried about, setting up an ornate display of crystal and china, while florists filled the space with towering arrangements of white roses. The atmosphere screamed celebration, yet Lucas felt anything but festive. His father, Robinson, had made his position painfully clear. "You'll marry her, Lucas," he had said, his voice calm but immovable. "You've had your fun. Now you'll grow up and honor this family, unless you'd rather leave my house and my fortune behind." Lucas had wanted to shout, to fight back, but he knew better. Robinson was not a man who wavered once a decision was made. Now, as the impending ceremony loomed, Lucas felt trapped, each step leading him further into a life he didn't choose. His only solace was the promise he whispered to himself. 1 year, maybe 2. I'll endure this farce until I get my share of the company. Then I'll be free. Ashley, on the other hand, sat quietly in the corner of her modest guest room. The opulence surrounding her felt suffocating, the gilded walls a stark reminder of the world she had stumbled into. The gown hanging before her was a masterpiece of lace and pearls, but to Ashley it was nothing more than a costume in a play she hadn't auditioned for. She sighed, running her fingers along the delicate embroidery. Her life had been a series of upheavals, and she had learned to adapt quickly. Yet the thought of facing a room full of strangers who would judge her every move was enough to make her stomach churn. The news of the wedding spread quickly, becoming the talk of the city's elite. Whispers floated through marble-floored lobbies and candle-lit dinners. "Lucas Robinson is marrying a nobody," they said, their voices dripping with curiosity and disdain. "A girl with no connections, no name, and no money. What is Robinson thinking?" Lucas heard the murmurs through his circles, the sly remarks from his so-called friends. At the gentlemen's club, one acquaintance raised a glass with a mocking grin. "To Lucas," he toasted, "and his unexpected choice of bride." Laughter rippled around the room, leaving Lucas burning with embarrassment. But he masked it with a smirk, pretending the comments didn't sting. "Just a year or two," he reminded himself. "Then none of this will matter." The wedding day arrived, ushered in by a rare cloudy sky. Lucas stood in the groom's suite, adjusting his cufflinks with unsteady hands. He stared at his reflection, his features drawn tight with irritation. A knock on the door broke his thoughts, and Robinson stepped in. "You look sharp," Robinson said, his tone almost approving. "This is a good day, Lucas. You may not see it now, but one day you'll thank me." Lucas forced a tight smile. "I'm sure I will, Father," he replied, the sarcasm barely masked. Robinson ignored it, patting his son on the shoulder before leaving the room. Meanwhile, Ashley sat before a vanity, her reflection framed by the ornate mirror. The hairstylist pinned the last strand of her hair into place, stepping back to admire the result. "Perfect," she said with a smile. But Ashley didn't feel perfect. She felt like an imposter, an actor thrust onto a stage where she didn't belong. Downstairs, the ceremony unfolded with meticulous precision. Guests whispered behind gloved hands as they took their seats, their eyes scanning every detail. Victoria floated among them, her smile warm and inviting, but her words cutting. "Isn't she lovely?" she purred to one group, referring to Ashley. "So authentic." I suppose Lucas wanted something different this time. Robinson, in contrast, greeted Ashley with a beaming smile as she walked down the aisle. "You'll make a fine addition to this family," he said warmly, his words genuine despite the cold formality of the event. Ashley nodded, her voice caught in her throat as the weight of his approval settled on her shoulders. As the ceremony began, Lucas stood stiffly at the altar, his gaze fixed somewhere far beyond the gathered crowd. Ashley joined him moments later, her steps measured, her face composed despite the storm of nerves inside her. The officiant began to speak, but Lucas barely registered the words. His mind buzzed with the thought of getting this over with. When the time came to exchange vows, Lucas spoke his lines with practiced detachment, the words hollow but clear. Ashley, in turn, repeated hers with quiet resolve, her voice steady despite the knot in her chest. The ceremony ended with polite applause, the couple walking back down the aisle as husband and wife. But beneath the surface, the tension lingered. Unspoken doubts, unspoken plans, and the unshakable feeling that this was just the beginning of a far more complicated story. The sprawling estate felt emptier than ever, even with its new occupants. Lucas avoided Ashley like a shadow in his peripheral vision. Their interactions were cold, obligatory, and carefully devoid of emotion. The mansion, grand as it was, seemed to magnify the chasm between them. Lucas rarely spoke unless necessary, leaving Ashley to wander its gilded halls, her quiet footsteps swallowed by the vastness of marble and mahogany. Ashley kept her head down, understanding her precarious position. She was an outsider in a world of wealth, tolerated but not embraced. Her every gesture, every breath seemed scrutinized by invisible eyes, though no one voiced it aloud. She busied herself with household routines, learning the ways of her new life in silence. Yet, the weight of isolation pressed down on her, especially when Lucas returned home each evening, reeking of alcohol or indifference, his disdain palpable. Lucas, for his part, carried his resentment like armor. His father's insistence that he return to work at the family company gnawed at him. Lucas had no intention of letting anyone dictate his life, especially not Robinson. Each day at the office was a begrudging charade. He would arrive late, barely skim through reports, and stare listlessly at the city skyline, his mind elsewhere. He found comfort in rebellion, imagining it would make his father furious. Robinson, however, remained steadfast. "You'll take responsibility, Lucas," he'd said the night before the wedding. "The company isn't a playground. I built it for you, not for your excuses." Lucas's routine of disregard hit a breaking point one morning. He'd spent the previous evening at a bar downtown, drowning his irritation in bourbon. Stumbling home past midnight, he collapsed into bed, oblivious to the fact that an important board meeting awaited him the next day. "Lucas," a voice called softly. He groaned and turned over, pulling the blankets over his head. "Lucas, wake up. It's urgent." It was Ashley. She stood at the edge of the room, clutching a folder of papers. Her face was pale but determined. "You're late for the meeting. I prepared everything for you." Lucas blinked at her, the haze of alcohol still thick in his head. "Meeting?" His voice was hoarse. "Yes, the board meeting about the East Side Development Project. Your assistant couldn't reach you, so I called to confirm the time." She hesitated, holding out the folder. "These are the materials you'll need." Rubbing his temples, Lucas reluctantly grabbed the papers. Without another word, he dressed hastily and drove to the office. The meeting room was already filled when he arrived. Murmurs of discontent filled the air as Lucas entered, disheveled but defiant. He tossed the folder onto the table and leaned back in his chair, prepared to endure another lecture from the board. But the lecture never came. Instead, as the meeting unfolded, Lucas noticed approving nods and murmurs of agreement among the executives. The plan was detailed, insightful, and precisely what the company needed to push forward with the project. By the end of the presentation, the room erupted in applause. "Excellent work, Lucas," one of the senior members remarked. "This is exactly the kind of leadership we need." Lucas sat frozen, his expression unreadable. He hadn't even opened the folder before the meeting. Something didn't add up. When he returned home, Ashley was setting the dining table, her movements measured and efficient. Lucas approached her, his jaw tight. "Care to explain?" he asked, his tone clipped. Ashley stiffened. "Explain what?" "The plan," Lucas said, slamming the folder onto the table. "That wasn't my work. You wrote it, didn't you?" Ashley hesitated, her eyes darting away. Yes, I did. I knew it was important. And you weren't—" "Why?" Lucas cut her off. "What do you gain from this? Trying to humiliate me? Impress my father?" Her lips trembled slightly, but she steadied herself. "No, Lucas. I wasn't trying to do any of that." She took a deep breath. "I just didn't want you to fail." "Why would you care?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Because I know what failure feels like," she said, her voice soft but firm. She glanced down at her hands as if deciding whether to share more. "I wasn't always like this, Lucas. My family was wealthy once, like yours. My father owned a conglomerate in Germany, but during the pandemic, we lost everything. He passed away and I was left stranded here, unable to return home." Lucas stared at her, stunned by the sudden vulnerability in her voice. "You... what?" I stayed because I thought I could rebuild something, Ashley continued, her eyes glistening. But without legal status, I couldn't work. I ended up on the streets because I had no other choice. That's the truth, Lucas. Nothing more. For the first time, Lucas saw her not as an interloper, but as a survivor. The layers of disdain and suspicion began to shift, replaced by an unfamiliar respect. "Why didn't you say anything before?" he asked, his voice softer now. Ashley met his gaze, her own unwavering. "Because I didn't think you'd listen." Lucas looked away, feeling a pang of guilt. He knew she was right. The days at the office took on a new rhythm after Ashley joined as Lucas's assistant. Though she hesitated at first, her sense of obligation to repay Lucas's begrudging kindness overcame her reluctance. Lucas had insisted, almost casually, that she come to the company with him. "You've already done more than I expected," he had said. "But if you're going to make plans for me, you might as well do it officially." The days turned into weeks. She found herself immersed in the company's inner workings. She organized files, scheduled meetings, and fine-tuned the details of Lucas's projects. Lucas, for his part, was pleased, perhaps too much so. With Ashley managing the bulk of his responsibilities, he found more time to indulge in his usual distractions. Late nights at high-end bars became frequent again. He revelled in the company of old friends and charming women, leaving Ashley to hold the reins at work. At first, Ashley thought little of it. "He'll grow out of it," she told herself, though the late-night whispers and lingering scent of perfume on his shirts told a different story. Lucas didn't care what people thought, as long as the work got done, and to his surprise, it did, flawlessly. Robinson began to notice the change. The reports Lucas presented were sharp, well organized, and met with unanimous approval from the board. "I'm proud of you, son," Robinson said one afternoon, clapping Lucas on the shoulder. "This is what I always hoped to see from you." Lucas shrugged off the praise with his usual nonchalance, but deep down it stirred something unfamiliar, a glimmer of pride. He didn't mention Ashley's role, though, and Ashley herself never sought credit. She worked quietly behind the scenes, her sharp mind proving invaluable to the company's operations. Robinson, buoyed by what he saw as Lucas's transformation, decided to give his son more responsibility. "You've earned it," he declared one evening, announcing Lucas's promotion to an expanded managerial role. While Robinson celebrated Lucas's apparent progress, Victoria seethed. For years, she had cultivated Lucas's vices, encouraging his reckless behavior as a way to undermine his father's confidence in him. Now, watching Lucas gain respect and influence, she felt her grip on the family slipping. She decided to act. Victoria hired a private investigator to follow Lucas during his nightly escapades. It didn't take long to gather what she needed: photos of Lucas drinking, laughing with friends, and cozying up to women in dimly lit bars. The images painted a damning picture, one that Victoria knew would cut Robinson deeply. The scandal broke in the papers on a brisk Wednesday morning. Headlines screamed accusations of infidelity, plastered alongside grainy photos of Lucas with unfamiliar women. The company's name was dragged into the mud, and Robinson's fury was immediate. "You've humiliated this family!" Robinson roared, slamming the newspaper onto the dining room table. His face, red with anger, betrayed the strain the situation was placing on him. "How could you be so careless?" Lucas opened his mouth to respond, but stopped short as Robinson staggered, clutching his chest. "Dad!" Lucas shouted, rushing to his father's side. Ashley, who had been standing nearby, darted forward to help. Together, they eased Robinson into a chair as he struggled to catch his breath. An ambulance arrived minutes later, its wailing sirens cutting through the tense atmosphere. Ashley rode with Robinson to the hospital while Lucas stayed behind, shaken but still grappling with the weight of the situation. The diagnosis was grim: a heart attack, leaving Robinson in a vegetative state. The family gathered around his hospital bed, their expressions a mixture of grief and uncertainty. But for Victoria, it was an opportunity. With Robinson incapacitated, she wasted no time consolidating power. Leveraging her influence within the board of directors, she positioned herself and her allies to take control. Lucas, despite his recent efforts, was demoted from his managerial role to a lowly position. The humiliation stung, but he was too overwhelmed by guilt and anger to fight back immediately. The once lively mansion grew eerily quiet. Ashley watched as Lucas retreated into himself, his usual bravado replaced by a sullen silence. Despite everything, she couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for him. "You can't let her win," Ashley said one evening, her voice firm. She found Lucas sitting in the study, staring at a glass of untouched whiskey. "Your father believed in you. Don't let him down." Lucas glanced at her, his expression unreadable. For the first time in days, he spoke with a hint of resolve. "I don't know if I can fix this," he admitted. "You can," Ashley replied, her gaze steady, "but not by giving up." Her words lingered in his mind long after she left the room. The next morning, Lucas sat at the edge of his bed, staring blankly at the check in his hand. He had written Ashley's name at the top, followed by an amount that, while modest compared to his previous means, was the best he could manage now. "You should go," he said quietly, the words heavy and deliberate. His voice lacked the sharpness of his usual dismissals, but the resignation in his tone was unmistakable. Ashley stood by the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Go where?" she asked softly. "Anywhere," Lucas replied, avoiding her gaze. "I don't have the means to take care of you anymore. There's no reason for you to stay." Ashley crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing slightly. "And what makes you think I'm here because of your means?" Her question caught Lucas off guard. He looked up, finally meeting her gaze. Her face, though calm, held an edge of defiance he hadn't expected. "You don't understand," he said after a moment, running a hand through his hair. "I've lost everything. The board's turned against me. Victoria's orchestrated this whole mess. And my father—" His voice broke and he swallowed hard. "He's gone, and I don't know how to fix it." Ashley stepped closer, her movements deliberate. "Lucas, if you want me to leave, fine. But not because you think I'm here for money or convenience. I stayed because I believe in you, even if you don't believe in yourself right now." Her words struck a chord deep within him. He had expected compliance, maybe even relief at the offer, but not this unwavering determination. He set the check down on the nightstand, unsure of what to say. That night, Lucas lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Ashley's words played over and over in his mind, mingling with memories of his father's stern but hopeful encouragement. Robinson had always believed in him, even when he had given him every reason not to. By morning, something had shifted. Lucas rose with a renewed resolve. He dressed in silence, the usual lethargy in his movements replaced by purpose. "You're up early," Ashley remarked as he entered the kitchen, her voice light but curious. "I've got work to do," Lucas replied simply, grabbing his briefcase. At the office, Lucas faced a wall of resistance. Victoria and her allies in the boardroom were relentless, undermining his efforts at every turn. Yet, Lucas didn't falter. He poured himself into his work, staying late into the night to refine proposals and troubleshoot issues. Ashley became an indispensable ally, quietly supporting him behind the scenes. She proofread documents, researched market trends, and even suggested strategies that Lucas hadn't considered. Their late-night brainstorming sessions became a routine, each one strengthening their unspoken partnership. One evening, Lucas stood before the board to present a proposal for a high-stakes contract with a major international firm. The tension in the room was palpable, the weight of skepticism hanging heavy in the air. Lucas spoke with confidence, his voice steady and authoritative. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment before erupting into murmurs of approval. "This is excellent work," one board member said, his tone surprised but sincere. "If this deal goes through, it could be a game changer for the company." Lucas allowed himself a small, restrained smile as he left the room. For the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. That evening, he and Ashley shared a quiet moment in the study. "You did it," she said, her voice filled with quiet pride. "No," Lucas replied, shaking his head. "We did it." But their victory didn't go unnoticed. Victoria, who had been watching Lucas's progress with increasing unease, saw the writing on the wall. He was no longer the aimless, reckless man she had once manipulated. He was becoming a force to be reckoned with, and that made him dangerous. In the dead of night, Victoria sat in her opulent living room, a glass of wine in hand. She stared at a photograph of Robinson on the mantel, her expression cold and calculating. Without a will, she thought, the company would fall into chaos upon Robinson's passing. If she acted now, she could solidify her control before Lucas gained more ground. The next morning, under the guise of a routine hospital visit, Victoria entered Robinson's room. The rhythmic beeping of the machines filled the air, a steady reminder of his fragile state. She stood by his bedside, her hand lingering over the tangle of wires and tubes. "I'm sorry, my dear," she murmured, though her tone held no remorse. "But this is the only way." With a swift, deliberate motion, she pulled the ventilator's plug. The room fell silent, save for the hum of the remaining machines. Victoria turned on her heel and left without a backward glance, her face a mask of composure. Back at the company, Victoria convened an emergency board meeting. She arrived poised and ready, prepared to announce Robinson's death and assert her claim to power. But as she began to speak, the doors to the boardroom opened. Gasps filled the room as Robinson himself entered, pale but upright, supported by Ashley. Victoria's composure shattered as her eyes darted between Robinson and Ashley. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "It means," Robinson said, his voice weak but resolute, "that your schemes are over." The room fell into stunned silence as the weight of his words settled. Victoria's carefully constructed facade crumbled, and for the first time she looked truly afraid. The boardroom was cloaked in a tense, unnatural silence. Victoria, dressed impeccably in a sharp navy suit, stood at the head of the table, her cold grey eyes scanning the faces of the assembled board members. With deliberate slowness, she placed her manicured hands on the edge of the table, the faint sound of her nails tapping the polished surface reverberating in the hushed room. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice smooth yet edged with a predatory confidence, "it is with a heavy heart that I must inform you of Robinson's untimely passing." A ripple of shocked murmurs spread through the room, but Victoria raised a hand to silence them. "As his widow and your acting chairwoman, I am prepared to lead this company into its next chapter, with your support, of course." From his seat near the far end of the table, Lucas sat frozen, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests of his chair. His mind reeled with a mix of anger, despair, and helplessness. He felt the eyes of the board on him, some filled with pity, others with quiet judgment. Just as Victoria was about to continue her carefully rehearsed speech, the heavy oak doors at the back of the room creaked open. The room fell into a stunned silence as Robinson himself stepped inside, followed closely by Ashley. Victoria's mask of composure faltered for a fleeting moment. Her eyes widened in disbelief, and her breath hitched audibly. "Impossible," she whispered, barely audible. Robinson, though pale and frail-looking, exuded a quiet authority as he walked steadily to the center of the room. His eyes, sharp and unwavering, locked onto Victoria. "Oh, it's very possible, Victoria," he said, his voice low but firm. "And you should have known better than to underestimate me." The room erupted into chaos. Board members exchanged frantic whispers, their shock palpable. Lucas stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Dad?" he asked, his voice cracking. Robinson turned to his son, a faint smile softening his otherwise stern expression. "Yes, Lucas, I'm alive, and I've been watching everything." Victoria took a step back, her hands trembling as she clutched the table for support. This is a setup," she stammered. "You've been lying to everyone." Ashley stepped forward, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to Victoria's unraveling composure. "No, Victoria," she said evenly. "The lies are yours, and it's time they come to light." Lucas turned to Ashley, his confusion deepening. "Ashley? What's going on? How are you involved in this?" Ashley hesitated, her green eyes filled with both regret and determination. "Lucas," she began softly, "there's something you need to know. Your father asked me to help teach you a lesson, to guide you back to the person he knew you could be." Lucas's brows furrowed in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" Taking a steadying breath, Ashley explained, "Your father and my father were close friends. When my father passed away, Robinson promised to look after me. When he saw you spiraling, he asked me to play a role, to challenge you, to show you the value of humility and responsibility. That's why I entered your life." Lucas stared at her, his mind struggling to process the revelation. You were part of this? From the beginning?" Ashley nodded, her voice tinged with sadness. "Yes, but it wasn't just for you, Lucas. It was also to uncover the truth about Victoria. Your father suspected her for years, but couldn't act without evidence. That's where I came in." Robinson stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on Lucas's shoulder. "Son, I never wanted to hurt you, but I couldn't stand by and let Victoria destroy our family, or you." Victoria, now visibly trembling, tried to regain her composure. "This is absurd. You have no proof of anything." Ashley reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, placing it on the table. "Actually, we have plenty of proof," she said calmly. "Emails, financial records, even documentation of the substances you used to poison Robinson. Everything is here." The board members leaned forward, their faces a mix of outrage and disbelief as they scanned the documents. "You thought you could silence me forever," Robinson said, his voice steel-edged. "But you underestimated the people around me." At that moment the doors opened once more, and 2 police officers stepped inside. "Victoria Edwards?" one of them said, stepping forward. "You're under arrest for attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy." Victoria's face crumpled as the officers approached her. "This isn't over!" she screamed, her voice shrill as they placed her in handcuffs. "You'll regret this." As she was escorted out, the room remained silent, the weight of the moment settling heavily on everyone present. Lucas, still reeling, turned to his father. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked, his voice a mix of hurt and confusion. Robinson sighed, his expression weary but resolute. "Because I needed you to learn, Lucas, to grow, and sometimes the best lessons come from within." Ashley placed a hand on Lucas's arm, her touch gentle but grounding. "I know this is a lot to take in," she said softly, "but everything I did was to help you see what you're capable of." For the first time, Lucas looked at Ashley with a newfound understanding. The anger and betrayal he felt began to fade, replaced by a deep sense of gratitude. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice sincere. Ashley smiled faintly. "You're welcome." And as the weight of the truth settled, Lucas felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Lucas sat alone in his father's study, the room heavy with memories. The scent of aged leather and cedar filled the air, a familiar comfort amidst the chaos of recent events. He stared at the old clock on the mantel, its pendulum swaying with deliberate precision. The same clock had ticked through his childhood, marking moments of triumph, failure, and everything in between. Now it marked the passage of something else, a change within himself. His father's revelation about Ashley lingered in his mind. Lucas felt as if the rug had been pulled from beneath his feet, leaving him unsteady, yet strangely grounded. Every interaction, every quiet act of support from Ashley took on a new meaning. She hadn't just been a reluctant participant in his life. She had been a guide, a mirror, reflecting the man he could be. For years, Lucas had been blind to his own potential, hiding behind rebellion and apathy. Now he felt a swelling gratitude for Ashley's courage and sacrifice. It wasn't just about the plans she had saved or the enemies she had helped him face. It was her unwavering belief in him, even when he didn't deserve it. But she was gone. The house felt emptier than ever since Ashley returned to Germany. Lucas had watched her leave, her figure retreating with quiet determination. She hadn't asked for anything, hadn't sought acknowledgement or reward. Yet she left an imprint on him, as indelible as a carving in stone. Lucas ran a hand through his hair, frustration and longing twisting in his chest. He hadn't fully understood his feelings until she was no longer there. It wasn't just gratitude. It wasn't just admiration. It was something deeper, more profound. "I let her go," he murmured to himself. The words a bitter truth. But he wouldn't let it end like this. Not now. 2 weeks later, Lucas stood in the arrivals hall of Frankfurt Airport. The air was crisp, the chill biting through his coat as he waited. He had never been to Germany before, and the unfamiliar surroundings mirrored his apprehension. What if she wouldn't see him? What if he was too late? But he had to try. He found Ashley in a small cafe near her university, sitting by a window. She was scribbling notes in a well-worn journal, her brows furrowed in concentration. For a moment, Lucas hesitated, unsure of how to approach her. The sight of her, calm, focused, unguarded, was both comforting and unnerving. Gathering his courage, he stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed softly, drawing her attention. Ashley looked up, her eyes widening in surprise. "Lucas?" she asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and confusion. "Hi," he said awkwardly, his hands stuffed into his coat pockets. He felt like a teenager, fumbling for words. I needed to see you." Ashley closed her journal, her expression guarded. "What are you doing here?" Lucas sat down across from her, the table between them feeling both too small and too vast. "I realized something after you left," he began, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I've spent so much of my life taking things for granted. People, opportunities, you, and I can't ignore that anymore." "Lucas," Ashley started, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish," he said, his tone firm but gentle. "You changed my life, Ashley. You didn't just save me from myself. You showed me what it means to care, to fight for something bigger than my own ego. I thought I was angry at my father for his plans, but now I see he wasn't trying to control me. He was trying to save me, and he couldn't have done it without you." Ashley's eyes softened, but she remained silent, waiting. "I love you," Lucas said, the words tumbling out with raw sincerity. "Not because of what you did, but because of who you are, and I can't imagine my life without you in it. I don't know if you feel the same, but I had to tell you." Ashley looked at him, her gaze searching his face for the truth. "You really mean that?" she asked quietly. "With everything I have," Lucas replied. A smile broke across her lips, hesitant but warm. "I thought you'd never figure it out," she said softly, a trace of humor in her voice. Lucas laughed, the sound full of relief. "Took me long enough," he admitted. They spent the next hours talking, their conversation flowing like a river finally unblocked. By the end of the day, they knew what they wanted: to build a life together, not just for themselves, but for others too. A year later, Lucas and Ashley stood hand in hand at the grand opening of the Robinson Foundation, named in honor of Lucas's late father. The organization aimed to support education, shelter, and second chances. Everything Lucas and Ashley had fought for and believed in. As they cut the ribbon, the crowd cheered. But for Lucas, the true victory was the quiet understanding between him and Ashley. A love forged in hardship, built on trust, and destined for something far greater than either of them had imagined. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of redemption, love, and second chances. Lucas and Ashley's story reminds us that even in our darkest moments, there's always an opportunity to change, to grow, and to build something meaningful, not just for ourselves, but for others too. If you found inspiration in their journey, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories like this. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue bringing you content that uplifts and inspires. And remember, just like Lucas and Ashley, you too have the power to create change, to turn challenges into opportunities, and to make a difference. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.